Hello, this is Sean Edwards, and this is my week 1 project for ALS. Let's go ahead and get started. For this application, I decided to use Code Igniter, and let's go ahead and get started. First, we have a user the user comes to the site and registers. Uh, this form does contain validation, so if we try to complete it without validating the forms or completing the form, it will not allow me to pass. So let's go ahead and set up a user. We'll name this Sean, give it a fake name, and I'll use fake email for now. Uh, Give it the username of admin1 and the password of number 1. So number 1. Okay, once you completed the registration, you are now a registered user and can now log in. So let's try this. Admin1 and number 1. Okay, we are now logged in. As you can see, once the user is logged in, to the right where the registered link is, it now displays a welcome and the name of the current user. And let's go ahead and get started using the CRUD. If we click on list, we can see that there's currently no list here, no task list. So let's go ahead and create a new list. I'm gonna create a new list and say, let's call this school stuff. Stuff for school. And now we have a new list here. And once we click to go into this list, you can see that it has the date of all the stuff that was created. And we go ahead and let's add a task to this. Add a task to this list. So we go ahead and create a task. Create week 2 app. Use Symfony, and we add a date of this of next week sometime. Now that we added the task has been added to the list of school stuff under my open task. And just to give you an example of this working in the database, let's go ahead and open up SQL Pro and refresh. As you can see right here, this is our new user that was created and it is added to the database. If you go to task, you can see that the task I created is now in here. It is currently showing two of the same item because I did create the same task under another user, and that's why the ID is different and stuff. Which is only displaying the SQL Pro is going to display all the stuff in the database, even if it's for different users. So you might see duplicate stuff is simply because I was doing it in another task. I was doing it in another account that I made. Here you can see a list of all the different stuff I have created and different users. The list user ID is the user number of the person who created it. So it is easy to identify when loading the document which user is going to get what task. But I just wanted to show that the list is currently working and that the database is currently working, that everything is loading and in here. So back on the back on the task here, we can mark an item complete, mark a task complete. As you can see, it's just status incomplete, but once we mark it complete, it moves to the recently completed list. And here in the database, under task, you will now see it says is completed 1, which shows that it is been completed. If we go back and we mark it as new and go back and refresh the database, you will see it now went back to 0 as it is uh, loading the database and updating the information. If I go ahead and delete this task from my task and I come back to the database, you will now see it's gone as it disappears. What else? I could also update this list and add to this, add different, once I add different stuff to this list, if I wanted to update this current task, I can. You see, this is the new updated. When we add this, it does change in, it does show inside the SQL, so everything is loaded and everything is currently working. If I wanted to add another, create another list, so let's say family stuff. Stuff for family, and now I can create another, I have another list that I can add tasks to. And I can continuously keep going and adding different stuff and updating and deleting all the different stuff I need to add to my different lists. Now let's go ahead. We can go ahead and log out, and it will return us back to the home. This front-end framework I used for this was Bootstrap, and I also use CodeIgniter for the back-end stuff. But let's go ahead and take a look at the code. Okay, for the application, there's a lot of different things that CodeIgniter you have to do for CodeIgniter, and I'm not going to speak on the whole everything, but I'm going to try and hit the most important parts of this. Let's go ahead and start with the controllers. I had to create a controller for almost everything, not almost everything, but for the list and for the task, and also a home controller. Home controller is for the layout. This to load the layout and basically make the layout work for the MVC structure. And here we have the list controller. This covers everything that has to do with the list and the sessions, the login sessions, and pertaining to the list. I added comments to everything because it took me a little bit to completely understand all of this and understand what everything did. So as I was making my way through tutorials and stuff and grabbing a little information from here and there, I just added notes so I could remember what things were. Let me see, what else? This is the task controller that has all the stuff for the task, like the arrays and some of the database stuff, like which includes SQL, which includes the SQL names and just different things that have to do with the task, like the function, the mark complete, the mark new, the delete. Yeah, basically everything that I need to add, not the functionality, but basically the buttons, and give it and link it to like the database and stuff like that. For the user's name here, we're adding a form validation and basically setting all the parameters or validation stuff for our form rules. We're setting our rules for the form. I think one of the hardest things about this was, as you can see here, the access clean. That is for the form validation and security. But at first when I used it, I was getting an error for using it, and I couldn't figure out what it was. But after some research, using CodeIgniter, one of the things I found out was that to use that in the config file, no, sorry, in the auto load file under helper, I have to add security right here to make it work. And it took me a while to find out why I was getting errors, and that's also what it was. Another thing I had issues was with the same thing was right here for the model. For the auto load for CodeIgniter, you have to use the auto load to load your classes, and it took me a while before I actually figured out why everything wasn't connecting and working properly. But actually, after watching a tutorial and different things, I figured out my way through it, and I was able to make it work. Let me see, what else should I show. Here's the controllers, which I already went over. Now let me show you the models. This is the list model. This is basically some of the stuff for the SQL Pro and pushing stuff to the database and pulling stuff so that uh, everything is interconnected inside the database. Like some of these things you may recognize from SQL, like the from and the join and where. Um, this document pretty much just pushes the stuff into the SQL Pro database, so everything links up. And again, we have the same thing here. As you can see, it says database select. We want to select all of this stuff, and we want to do all these SQL commands to add all this stuff to the database. And and we're adding like verification, like for here, right here. This is the verification for, excuse me, this is the verification to check to see if an item has been completed in the database and stuff like that. And again, this is like to mark it. If you want to if you want to make it a new item instead of if it's completed or not, to display the user's task, we needed this so that the different users are able to load their particular task basically by the ID that was given set up in the database and stuff like that. So what else do I have to go? The views is basically the layout view is the layout for the whole thing. I only had to do that once because it is an MVC. So basically I set up the whole bootstrap layout in one document, and all I had to do was load the view with the main content, which I set up in the controllers right here as the home. See, main content equals home and layout main. So it will load the main layout and then all the different views depending on where I am. For example, this is the view to add list. As you can see, this is basically just a form, but the structure is a CodeIgniter form. So that's why it is structured this way. Yeah, here's the, no, I think that's a duplicate. And again, the same thing for the task. We have the add task, the edit task, and these are all also, damn, I'm having a brain. These are all also a form done in PHP but CodeIgniter format. We have the assets folder. We also have an assets folder which contains all of our Bootstrap CSS documents, our fonts, our glyphicons, our Bootstrap JavaScript for the responsive, responsive nav bar and such. I didn't really have to mess with any of these documents. These are just CodeIgniter stuff that comes with CodeIgniter. The only one I did have to add was the HT access was because of a routing issue I had. I don't exactly understand what this document does, but I know it has something to do with the URLs and links, so that some files and certain directories are accessible, and that's it.